Welcome back to another episode of Is Fitz Happy? I'm Luke.
And I'm Emma.
And this week we're discussing chapter 33 of Madship, Proofs. We start with Kennit. Before we dive into this episode, I do want to say there is a content warning. We do discuss some incidents with Althea later on in the chapter dealing with sexual assault. So just warning you right now, if that's something that you don't want to listen to, we'll probably put a timestamp in the episode description, but in the later half of the episode, we will be discussing that.
Right. As always, take care of yourself first. The episode is not that important.
But first, Kennit. And as gross as he is, we don't deal with that topic in this.
Yes.
It doesn't seem like much time has passed. He talks about going back to his ship and looking over the plans he has for Divvytown, rebuilding it, and reworking some of the ideas that he had. And this is something that he likes to do and remembers his father doing over, Key Island. And him as a little kid just listening to his father talk about that kind of thing. So he enjoys it.
Yeah, so I made a note of Verity when he said this is the thing that he likes when he's creating a new map. And if we remember last time we had Kennit's point of view, it was when they had just arrived at Divvytown and there was sort of a fight about Kennit's blame of Divvytown being attacked.
Right.
So he's definitely in high spirits here. He's come back. He has apparently been traversing through the island on foot and looking up close at everything in a way that he's never been able to before because his previous map was made solely from memory. So now he is remaking the map so that it's more accurate and fixing the problems that he didn't realize were problems.
Right. And he's interrupted by his charm asking, "What is the purpose of this?" Kennit scowled at the squiggle of ink his start had caused. He blotted it carefully away. It would still leave a mark. He would have to sand it out of the vellum. He frowned as he leaned to the work again. "The purpose of this design," he said more to himself than to the insolent charm, "is that this structure can double as a safe haven in case of attack, as well as a temporary shelter until their homes are rebuilt. If they put a well here inside and fortify the outside structure, then they could starve to death instead of being carted off for slaves," the charm observed brightly. "Raiding ships don't have that type of patience usually. They're after a quick, easy capture of plunder and slaves. They are not likely to besiege a fortified town. But what is the purpose of these plans? Why do you take such an interest in creating a better town for folk you secretly despise?" For a moment, the question stymied him. He looked down at his plans. The folk of Divvytown were truly not worthy to live in such an orderly place. It did not matter, he discovered. "It will be better," he said stubbornly. "It will be tidier." "Control," the charm corrected him. "You will have left your mark on how they live their lives. I have decided that that is what you are all about, Kennit. Control. What do you believe, pirate? That if you can get enough control, you can go back and control the past? Make it all unhappen? Put your father's precise plan back to work, bring his little paradise back to life? The blood will always be there, Kennit. Like a smear of ink on a perfect plan, the blood sinks in and stains. No matter what you do, when you walk into that house, you will always smell the blood and hear the screams." He had thrown down his pen in fury. To his disgust, it had left a snake's trail of blood across his plans. No, not blood, he told himself angrily. Ink, black ink, that was all it was. Ink could be blotted and bleached away. So could blood. Eventually.
So what do you think about the charm's read of Kennit's reasoning?
I think it's accurate. Especially with his reflection at the end there. Ink could be blotted and scrubbed away, and so could blood eventually. I think he is, like we've talked about before, trying to reverse or erase Ygritte's mark on the world, and that includes, at its core, the island, the safe haven that his father had. And that's kind of the core of Kennit, right? It's
Hmm.
what he wants to get rid of is that stain on his past.
Interesting. I felt as though maybe there's some humanity to Kennit, especially this whole section. I feel like, I mean, he is off being awful most of the time and he's not a good person, but I think he's a deeply broken person. And underneath that, he wants to be good, maybe. And maybe I'm just being too optimistic. And maybe I've drank the Kool Aid along with Wintrow, but it just feels like he does things for the betterment of the society he's a part of
Sure. Yeah.
and tells himself it makes me think of Althea. He's telling himself the story that makes sense to him, in which case, or in his case, that they don't deserve this. He's just making things tidy. It's all control. But I wonder if actually it's more that like he does want to see a better world out there. Like maybe if everything hadn't happened to him the way it did, he would be a better person. I don't know. It's really hard to tell.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. I don't know.
but I don't know, just a thought that I had while reading this of maybe it wasn't about control. Maybe the charm isn't a reliable read of Kennit because it is a separate being.
Yeah. It doesn't know his innermost thoughts automatically or anything like that.
Right. I don't know. So, yeah. But Kennet's done. He needs to go to bed.
And he lays in the darkness for a while and waits for Etta to come in. But when she did come in, she came slinking in like a cat after a night's hunt. He knew where she had been. He listened to her disrobe in the darkness. She came softly to the side of the bed she slept in and tried to slip under the covers. So, how is the boy? He asked her in a hearty voice. She gasped in surprise. You startled me, Kennit. I thought you were asleep. Obviously. He was angry, he decided, not because she had slept with the boy. He had intended that all along, of course. It was that she thought she could deceive him about it, that she meant she thought he was stupid. It was time to divest her of that notion. So obviously, like we were just talking about, how Kennit does have some humanity, and we've been mentioning that a little bit over the chapters of this book, where he has grown in fondness of Etta, and even though his inner monologue says that he is not, he has come to rely on her for a lot of things compared to when he first met her and was talking about her. And this, he is obviously jealous and hurt when he assumes that she had slept with Wintrow.
Right. I think, yeah, this especially, I'm like, oh, maybe there's more humanity to Kennit, which,
He is human, right? Like,
yeah,
partially forging you doesn't mean that you lost your humanity. Fitz is partially forged for a long time, and he still has emotions and compassion and things like that. It's just severely blunted and dulled.
yeah. And I think also with the traumatic events that Kennit has faced, of course, he's going to distance himself from caring about things because that's a vulnerable place to be in. If you have things you care about, that means there's things to lose. And I think that's ultimately something that Kennit does not want.
Right.
And
So he pushes back against that notion.
yeah, and I think seeing that here so clearly of he clearly has really deep feelings for Etta. Maybe not deep, but he has some sort of
Feelings in general, which
feelings.
is a surprise.
But yeah, but I do also want to make the comment that I don't think acknowledging his humanity and feelings for Etta excuses the way that he treats her. And I don't think that it excuses him being a monster of a human being. I just think it is important, especially with these characters that are so full of depth, to explore those depths, not just stop at, well, he's a monster, so it doesn't matter.
Well, he is hurt at this, and he does press her a little bit, and she explains what she was doing, that she went to Wintrow and helped him because his arm was swollen still, because remember, Wintrow's arm was injured in that fight.
Yes.
And they ended up talking for a while about the purpose of philosophy, because Etta has been reading a philosophy book.
The questions I ask myself every day.
Yes. A waste of one's time, I told him. What is good of pondering how one knows that a table is a table? He argued that it makes us think about how we think. I still think it is foolish, but he insists I should read it. I had not realized how long we had argued until I left his room. Argued? Not angrily. Discussed, I should have said.
This whole conversation is so... Oh, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a married couple. It's very, I don't know, real
Yeah.
and feels like a normal relationship. I mean, if you ignore all the weird thoughts that Kennit has, it's so marital. I don't know. It just is like interesting how normal of a relationship conversation this feels. And especially with Kennet's little snide remarks of, you know, like it sounds like she is sincere in asking what's wrong with me. And I don't know, being worried about, oh, you argued with Wintrow? It just...
And Etta saying, I've washed, and him saying, in Wintrow's room. It's like, no, in the galley. And then she asks almost sharply, Kennit, why did you ask me that? Do you mistrust me? I am faithful to you. Faithful? The word shocked him. She sat up abruptly in the bed, her action snatching the blankets off him. Of course faithful. Faithful always. What did you think? This could be a barrier to all his plans for her. He tugged at the blanket as she lay back down beside him. He formulated his words carefully. I thought that you would be with me for a time, until another attracted you. He shrugged lightly, more disturbed than he liked to admit. Why should it be so hard to admit this? She was a whore. Whores were not faithful. Until another attracted me? Such as Wintrow, you mean? Wintrow? He is closer to your age than I am. His body is sweet and young, scarcely scarred and possessed. I might add, of 2 legs. Why would you not find him more desirable? You are jealous! She said it as if she was just presented with a diamond. Oh, Kennit, you are being silly. Wintrow? I started to be kind to him only because you asked it of me. Now I have come to see his value. I see what you wanted to show me about him. He has taught me much, and I am grateful for that. But why would I trade a man for an untried youth? He is whole, Kennit pointed out. Today he fought as a man. He killed. He fought today, yes, but that scarcely makes him a man grown. He fought for the first time with the blade we gave him and the skills I taught him. He killed, and that act consumes and torments him tonight. He spoke long about it, the wrong of taking from a man what Sa alone could give him. He wept about it. And that made you despise him as less than a man? No, it made me pity him. He's a youth torn between his natural gentleness of spirit and his need to follow you. She goes on a little bit, but yeah, this is, again, just directing back to that conversation. Kennit is jealous. He is struggling to follow the train of this conversation because he's not used to expressing these feelings at all and doesn't know where it's coming from.
Yeah, and also we see an openness in this conversation that I don't think he has ever shown us, at least that we've been able to see since we've been in his point of view and following him. But there is an openness here of him admitting the truth of he assumed that she would be with him until somebody better came along. And it does bother him. And I kind of find that a little sweet. I think that's like, I don't know, a normal fear that I think a lot of people in relationships have, especially in beginning stages of, oh, maybe it's not going to last. But it's really interesting to have this reassurance from Etta and Kennit's openness to that and trying to figure out why she wouldn't want Wintrow, because Wintrow's young.
It's so weird to have, like you mentioned before, such a relatively normal conversation, but interspersed with these weird things about these characters because neither of them are good people.
No, yeah.
Edda's just like, oh yeah, I hated him, but you told me to try to be nice to him, and then I saw his value because you saw the value.
Yeah. And like talking about Wintrow as though he's a tool and an object and not a person. Like
Right.
Etta is going along with that
Yeah.
and participating. And I feel like that's kind of crazy to think about.
Oh yeah. I mean, they're both not great people.
No.
She's
And
very bloodthirsty, and
yeah.
it is Kennit.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe to be fair, maybe she's trying to make it seem less bad because she knows Kennet's jealous. And sometimes you like
Yeah.
overstate how much nothing is going on when you want to reassure someone. But it's, yeah, I don't know. I still like Etta because she's a cool character, but it's kind of weird to see her in this light as well. And it really does make me feel like Etta probably likes the bad things about Kennit in a way that Vivacia can't accept.
Yeah.
Like, and I think Etta has bought into an image of Kennit as well as everybody else.
Right.
But I think her image of Kennit is the closest to real Kennit.
Probably, yeah.
So, I don't know. Find that interesting.
But Etta goes on about Wintrow because they've discussed this, Wintrow and Etta, and she is explaining that, yeah, Wintrow is super torn about killing this man, and he's torn between wanting to be gentle and his need to follow you. He himself knows that and spoke of it tonight. A long time ago, when we were first thrown into one another's company, I said things to him, common sense things such as finding his life in what is instead of longing after what could be. He took those things to heart so seriously, Kennit. He now believes that Sa has steered him to you. Everything, he says, that happened to him since he left his monastery carried him toward you. He believes that Sa gave him over to slavery so that he might better understand your hatred of it. He fought the idea for so long. He says that he resisted it because he was jealous of how his ship swung so quickly to you. That jealousy blinded him and made him seek out faults in you. But over the last few weeks, he has come to see it as Sa's will for him. He believes he is destined to stand beside you, speak out for you, and fight for you. Yet he dreads the last. It tears him. Poor boy, Kennit said aloud. It was hard to sound sympathetic with triumph racing through his heart. He tried. It was almost as good as if she had slept with a boy.
I just want to say that this feels like
Wintrow's turned.
Yeah, but it feels like what's that called? Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, after captivity for several months, now he's realized that this is God's plan all along.
Right.
Sa's plan all along.
Well, I mean, with what we've discussed about Wintrow, that makes perfect sense because his only guiding principles are what Sa's plan for everybody is. And even though Kennit goes against almost all of those principles, he has to be there for a reason according to Wintrow's faith. And if he is going to stick to his faith, he has to believe this is Sa's plan for him, right?
That's fair.
Because if you say that, no, this is not right, then his belief system goes out the window because it gets rid of a core tenet that Sa has a plan for everybody and it's Sa's will that things are happening, right? So with such a young, almost priest, that is a contradiction that he can't grasp about Sa right now, right? Like that, he has to cling to those beliefs. And so having Sa to believe in really kind of dooms him to follow Kennit.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's fair. It's a good assessment. I don't know, it just makes me a little sad, I guess, to chalk up everything as, oh, it had to happen so that I could better follow you, Kennit.
The line that makes me kind of laugh is, Sa put me into slavery to better understand Kennit's hatred of it.
Yes.
Kennit doesn't even hate it. It's
literally. Well, I don't know. I think I just also it's frustrating to see Wintrow throw away all of his really good points that were negativities about Kennit and his knowledge of Kennit doing things bad or like being bad underneath. I don't know. It's frustrating that he was so close to being a skeptic and now it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe he's not that bad. And to be fair, Kennit is something that Wintrow's father never was, and that is somebody willing to listen
Right.
and willing to debate him. I think that's what Wintrow cares more about, even because Kyle refused to even entertain the educational side of Wintrow, whereas
Hmm.
Kennit spends time debating philosophy with him. And Kennit doesn't always agree with Wintrow's takes on things, but I think Wintrow would appreciate the fact that,
He engages.
yes, he's trying to meet him. I don't know. So I really feel like, if anything, it was Kyle's plan that set him on this path because of how horrible Kyle was to his
Just
son.
blame it on Kyle again.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
well, if Kyle had been like even 10% better of a father, maybe maybe it wouldn't be so easy to be like, oh, hey, a older male figure who respects me and gives me positive attention and doesn't beat me up. I should follow him. I don't know. Just a thought. Also, aren't Kyle and Kennit like the same age?
About, yeah.
So, fatherly figure.
They continue their conversation about Wintrow here, and Etta says that she tries to comfort Wintrow through all of that and basically explain it away, saying, it could all just be chance. It doesn't have to be destiny. And Kennit guesses correctly what he says in response to that. There is no chance, only destiny. Etta asks, how did you know? And Kennit replies, it is one of the cornerstones of Sa's teachings, that destiny is not reserved for a few chosen ones. Each man has a destiny. Recognizing it and fulfilling it are the purpose of a man's life.
I want to stop right there. I know there's more to this, but that specific tenet of Sa, that core belief of the followers of Sa, does that not sound like something a white prophet would be preaching?
We've talked about this before.
Yeah. But I feel like this is another point towards maybe Sa is a white prophet.
Yeah, but it's slightly different than the white prophet stuff too, though, right?
In what way?
Because this is saying that each man has a predetermined destiny set out before him, and the white prophets are like, you can make better choices to change the future.
Touche. Well, I guess maybe the way that I'm reading it, it's a little different, is that every single person has something that they can do or like a destiny that they can work towards. And so like everybody is equally important in that. And I feel like that's something that we see Beloved echo
Right.
sometimes, that like
Just the importance of every person is kind of like
Yeah.
central to both of those thoughts.
Yeah, I didn't read it as it's a predestined destiny, just that everybody has destiny
Yeah.
and you need to find that.
Yeah. Could be a core like branching moment for both.
Yeah. And it could also be, I mean, if Saw was a white, it was thousands of years ago, probably back when dragons were around.
Right.
So the teaching could have been grapevined away from the original to be something a little bit different. But anyway, sorry, we can go back at looking at the whole of what's being discussed here.
Etta thinks that teaching is pretty burdensome, but Kennit explains it as, if a man can believe it, then he can know he is as important as any other man. He can also know that he is no more important than any other is. It creates a vast equality of purpose. But what about the man he killed today? That is Wintrow's hurdle, isn't it? To accept that someone is destined to die at his hand and that he is destined to wield the knife. In time, Wintrow will see that it was not his doing that slew the man at all. Saw brought them both together to fulfill their destinies. Etta spoke hesitantly. Then you too believe in Saw and his teaching? When it fits my destiny to do so, Kennit told her loftily, and then laughed. He suddenly felt inexplicably good. And then he outlines a plan to bring him eventually to Other Island, have his fortune told, and then Kennit will tell him what that fortune means.
Yeah, I think I love Etta's like, wait, are you also a believer of Saw? And Kenneth's like, nah, just when it suits me.
Another
Kind
point
of funny.
towards this is kind of the real Kennit that Etta sees sometimes.
Yeah. Good mood, Kenneth.
Right.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I also found a little bit of humor in Etta's comment that she was just saying common sense to Wintrow, and he took that as profound. And it really goes back to he's just so naive. He's really sheltered. And
Well, and he was taught to examine advice and words like that
yeah.
specifically and their intent behind them. So, yeah, I mean, that's how he was trained.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. Just interesting to see Etta's point of view of that. Well, I guess it's not her point of view, it's what she has said to Kennit, but
Yeah.
close enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, now this is where the content warning starts. We're going to jump over to Althea's point of view. So, again, just be careful about that. Althea is in charge of finding a barrel of spoiled meat. Brashen had discovered it by smell, who gave the task to Lavoy. Lavoy passed it on to Althea. Althea signed a task crew of Lop and R2.
Yes.
Lop is the half-witted one, and R2 is the rapist, or one of the rapists, I guess, that is on board. And they are doing nothing and being very idle. And R2 is kind of gambling and getting Lop's money out of him, wasting time.
Yeah, it looks like they've done half the job. Maybe some things are pushed aside, some stuff has been moved, but they were supposed to go through all of the cargo and find the cause.
So she goes down there, finds them not doing much of anything, yells at them, which cask has the rotten meat? And they are astounded that she's there and snuck up on them, first of all. And Lop is kind of surprised, like, oh, he's been cheating me out of this. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, R2 was playing it had 3 shells and was having Lop find the bean.
Yeah.
And when Althea startles them, all the shells topple over and there is no bean, Lop points out. And Althea responds, there never is.
Althea asks R2, why haven't you found the cask and cleaned it up? He came to his feet, licking his lips nervously. He was a small, bandy-legged man, more quick than strong. 'Cause there ain't one to find. Me and Lop, we shifted all the cargo in this hold and looked at it all and found nothing. Right, Lop? Lop goggled at her, his large, pale eyes wide. We didn't find it, ma'am. You didn't move all the cargo. I can smell it. Can't you? Just ships stink, that's all. All ships smell like that. R2 shrugged elaborately. When you have been on as many ships as I have, he began condescendingly, but Althea cut him off. This ship doesn't stink like that, and it never will as long as I'm a mate on it. Now get that cargo shifted, find that rotten meat, and clean it up. R2 scratched at a boil on the side of his neck. Our watch is almost up, ma'am. Maybe the next watch will find it. He nodded to himself in satisfaction and gave Lop a conspiratorial nudge. The lanky sailor echoed R2's grin. Tidings for you, R2. You and Lop are on watch down here until you find it and clean it up. Clear? Now get on your feet and start shifting this cargo. That ain't fair, R2 cried as he came to his feet. We worked our watch. Hey, come back here. This ain't fair. His grubby fingers caught at her sleeve. Althea tried to jerk free, but his grip was amazingly strong. She froze. She wouldn't risk a struggle that she might not win, nor a torn shirt with this man. She met his gaze with narrowed eyes. Let go. Lop stared, wide-eyed as a boy. R2, she's second mate, he whispered nervously. You're gonna get in big trouble. Mate, R2 snorted in disgust. Quick as a flea's hop, he shifted his grip from her sleeve to her forearm inside it. His dirty fingers bit down hard on her flesh. She ain't no mate. She's a woman. And so this is just a scene where now R2 has physical control of Althea and is just like, well, she's not going to tell me what to do, and I'm just going to say something and convince Lop that that is correct.
Yeah, he decides that he's done taking Althea's orders and he will show her who's boss. And it starts a struggle.
Right.
And there's a lot of panic on Althea's side of the fact that she is in this position where there is a man who is stronger than her, she acknowledges, trying to attack her, and she has very little space in which to fight back. So
Right.
It's not even that she is incapable of fighting back. She just is incapacitated, I guess.
Yeah, and she knows that she can't scream out for help because one, R2 wants her to scream.
Yes.
And two, she's in the hold, so like no one will really hear her.
Exactly.
And she can't rely on Paragon to pass that word along if he is aware even of what's going on, because he's kind of been muttering and flaky a little bit.
Yeah, he's been having some trouble thinking about there being serpents in the water and ghost logs, and so things have been tight, or tensions have been high with Paragon, so
right,
that's not really an option. But here and now, she just needs to focus on winning this battle.
Yeah, because she knows that once R2 is done, if he gets his way, he will have to kill her and then make it look like an accident, convince Lop that it was an accident, and even if Brashen doesn't believe him and punishes them both and kills them both, she won't be around.
Exactly. So
it's life or death for her right now.
Yes. And there is a lot of fighting. And I think part of this that is done so well is that it is really scary, right? We're in Althea's point of view, and you can feel the tension. You can feel the rising stakes and the rising anxiety that Althea is going through. She starts by hitting R2 in the stomach, and he's not even flinching, and she's hit him as hard as she can. And now what? And he's, giving her less room. Now she can't get a full swing in. And it's just a lot of her needing to think on her feet and think, what's the next thing I can do to defend myself? And I think that aspect is done really well. It's a lot of panic, and it is realistic panic, I guess.
Right. There's not a lot of combat scenes that Robin Hobb actually writes out in these books. I mean, there's some more in the Fitz books, but this is described pretty viscerally. They fall over on their side. Lop is towering over them. The great dolt was hitting himself in the chest in his distress. His mouth hung open, wailing. No time to think.
Right. And Althea mentions when they fall that she's doing everything she can to make sure he doesn't land on top. Like, she doesn't want to give him any more advantage than he already has. And she is pushing really hard to make sure nothing happens.
Slamming his head into kegs, and his grip is loosening a little bit here, trying to kick at him, and he's, laughing and struggling with her. And eventually she foreheads him in the teeth and breaks some of his teeth. And that seems to really jolt him.
Yes. With his broken front teeth, he suddenly is incapacitated and howling and kind of curling up into fetal position. So Althea is able to use that to get one up on him and
starts wailing on him.
Yeah. teaching him a lesson for going after her.
She hears one of her knuckles pop and one of her punches has a sharp pain. And she's standing in the confined space and she's kicking him instead then after she gets up.
Right. When he was laying on his side, balled up and moaning, she stopped.
She pushed her loose, bloody hair back from her forehead and stared around her. Hours seemed to have passed, but the lantern still flickered and Lop still gaped at them. She had never realized how half-witted the man was until now. He was chewing on his knuckle, and as her eyes met his, he shouted at her, "I'm in trouble, I know, I'm in trouble." His eyes were both defiant and scared. "Find that keg of rancid meat and get it overboard." She stopped to catch another breath. "Clean up the mess. Then you're off watch." She suddenly hunched over, hands on her knees, and took several deep breaths. Her head was spinning. She thought she would throw up, but managed not to. R2 was starting to uncurl. She kicked him again, hard. Then she reached overhead to the freight gaff. She grabbed the hook by the handle and twisted it free of the beam. Now, these are big hooks that they use to like grab onto the cargo and like the barrels and move them out of the way so they don't just have to use their hands. This was part of the scene earlier when she came down and saw them idle. These hooks were just in the roof. They weren't being used at all. And now she grabs one down, and R2 rolls his head and stares up with her with one blood-caked eye. "Sar, no," he begged. He threw up his hands over his head. "I didn't do nothing to you." The pain in his broken teeth seemed to have completely disabled him. He waited for the blow to fall. Lop gave a wordless shout of horror. He frantically began moving crates and kegs looking for the spoiled meat. But instead, Althea grabs R2's shirt, puts the hook through it, gives it a twist to lock his arms into place, and drags him out and hauls him out after her and out onto the deck.
She dragged him on, almost a dead weight behind her. She supplemented her ebbing strength with her anger. She could hear Paragon shouting, but couldn't make out his words. By this time, a few heads had appeared at the hatch and were peering down curiously. They were from Lavoie's watch.
Althea knows that means Lavoie is most likely on deck somewhere, but she didn't look at them as she was clambering up the steps and dragging R2 behind her.
She's putting all her determination into reaching the deck. And so in this moment, I don't know if this is something that Althea was thinking ahead for, but I like to think the idea was now's the time to teach the lesson, like she had talked about with Amber earlier, where you have to wait for a moment to show these men that just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you don't deserve the position of second mate. And
Right.
you need to show your strength in a way that isn't, quote, underhanded. It's something that shows that you have power and you can use it in a fair way because you're fighting from the top. You have to fight fair.
Right.
And so I like to believe that this was a way to send a message of don't mess with me from Althea to all the other guys on board who have not been taking her seriously because she handled her own in this situation. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's kind of just anger in the moment.
Yeah,
and
honestly, I don't think it was calculated. I think she's just like, we need to get rid of this guy.
yeah.
I mean, maybe it was, but it doesn't even, there's not even a hint of that appears in her mind because I think she's kind of turned off her mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's really interesting to have this happen. I guess not interesting, but it's interesting to see her point of view during this and
Right.
to have it be something that is so uncomfortable. I think we've had writers or people that listen write in to let us know that that's what they like about Hobb's portrayal of these sort of things, is that it is uncomfortable and it does force you to come to terms with the fact that this happens to people
Right.
in a very real way. And I think that is important in a lot of ways. It's not gratuitous. This isn't happening to further the plot necessarily, but yeah, I don't know.
As she hauled R2 up behind her, the exclamations became curses of awe. She caught one glimpse of Half staring wide-eyed at her. She headed for the port railing, dragging R2 after her. He was moaning and mewling. I didn't do nothing to her. I didn't do nothing. His complaints were muffled by his own hands held protectively over his broken teeth and bloody mouth. Lavoy looked at them incuriously from his post on the starboard railing. Brashen suddenly appeared on deck. His shirt was open and he was barefoot, his hair unbound. Clef trailed after him, his mouth still tattling. The captain took in the situation at a glance. Brashen stared in horror at her bloodied face and disheveled clothing, but only for an instant. Then he glanced about for the mate. Lavoy, what is going on here? Why haven't you put a stop to this? Sir? Lavoy looked puzzled. He glanced over at Althea and R2 as if he had only now just noticed them. Not my watch, sir. The seconds seem to have it well in hand. He hardened his voice to that of command as he asked her, Am I correct? Can you handle your task, Althea? She halted where she stood to look at him. I'm throwing the rotten meat overboard like you ordered, sir. She put another half twist on the hook as she spoke. For a moment all was still. Lavoy transferred his quizzical look to Brashen. The captain shrugged. Carry on. He began fastening his shirt as if it did not concern him. He lifted his eyes to look over the water and see what sort of weather lay before them. It's an interesting scene here, and one that gives me a lot of respect for Lavoy, because he sees that Althea is handling it. Him stepping in would take some of that power that she just gained for herself away from her.
Right.
And she's dealing with whatever comes. Maybe it's genuine, I don't care what happens in this as long as they behave. But I think it's also a little bit of she earned this task and is doing it to the best of her ability and dealing with her insubordinates.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is a good read, that by Lavoy giving the authority back to Althea instead of saying, oh, sure, I'll handle it, Captain, it was really helpful to her and does elevate what she's doing to she's second mate and she's
Right.
taking care of business.
And later on, Brashen does apologize for his words, which I think is this occasion right here, where he's asking, like, hey, handle it, like Althea can't handle it.
Yes. Yeah, because his instinct is to protect her.
Right.
And I think his first instinct is to see what her father would be upset about and try to rectify that without really thinking about Althea as the person first. But he's trying, and he does let it go. He does drop it and say, oh, you're right, and gives her full permission, which also helps with being like, oh yeah, she has it. I trust her decision too. And I think that's pretty big as well.
But as R2 is howling, as she drags him over to the side, Lop comes up and says, hey, I found it. I found the spoiled meat. Me and R2 will get it cleaned up, right, R2? Like, it'll be fine. He throws a bucket of the spoiled meat over the side, and a serpent comes up and grabs that meat. So, startles everybody, of course. And Paragon then adds to the cacophony and is yelling, Serpent! Serpent! Althea let go of the cargo hook. R2 scrambles backwards. And for a long instant, she and the serpent stared at one another, eye to eye. She kind of describes the scales a bit. And for a moment, the beauty of the immense animal transfixed her. Then it opened jaws that could have easily engulfed a whole man. She stood stock still. It closed its mouth and stared at her. She caught movement from the corner of her eye, a man running with a boat hook. At the same instant came Brashen's shouted warning, Don't anger it, leave it alone. She turned and flung herself at Half. The sailor brandished the long gaff like a weapon, shouting, I'm not afraid. The pallor of his face told a different story. She caught at his arm and tried to stop him. It just wants food, leave it alone, it might go away. Half, leave it alone. He shook her off impatiently. Her bruised hands were suddenly too sore to grip. She fell away from him as he spurned her. In horror, she watched him swing the hook. No! Brashen roared, but the gaff was already in motion. It struck the animal glancing off the scales, but did manage to catch a nostril and dig in. So obviously angers the serpent.
Right.
Half is trying to show off once again that he is important and strong and brave and the right man for the crew to follow, and tries to be a hero despite orders, and angers the serpent.
Right. And makes the situation way more dangerous. I do want to quick ask, do we know of any of the serpents that are green in color?
No, I don't think so. Well, yes, green we do, but I thought this one was not like bright green.
Green of new spring foliage.
Oh, okay. It is.
So is that the one that sings?
I don't think they're not following Paragon. So I don't think they're there. I think this is just a random serpent.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, I think they would have, like with Ring's Gold, if they had attacked and killed a serpent, they would have brought this ship down because they learned how to do that.
But they don't later with Vivacia.
I know, because no one's antagonized them.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I don't know. I guess, yeah, they wouldn't have left him alone to...
And there would be more than one snatching at the meat as well.
Right. I guess I just ask because later, which we'll dive into more, Paragon says, I know you, which insinuates that the dragon still had, the serpent still had memories.
Yeah.
And was trying to remind Paragon who he was, question mark?
Not necessarily, because the serpent does bleed on the deck. So it's more doesn't have to have the memories itself. He keeps shouting, blood are memories,
Fair enough.
Blood remembers, so. But yeah, the gaff hook is caught in the nostril. The serpent kind of swells up and expels its poison all over. Again, we can tell it's not a fully healthy serpent or well-fed one, because the poison does not immediately eviscerate half.
Yeah.
He just kind of like falls to the deck. He shrieks as he was engulfed in a fog of the stuff. The drift of poison stung Althea's skin like sunburn, so half falls bonelessly to the deck and lets go of the gaff. The serpent abruptly cocked its head, eyeing the prone man. Then it darted its head at half. Althea was the only one close enough to do anything, so she grabs the hook itself, even though the handle's kind of getting eaten away by the poison a bit.
Right.
But it's sturdy enough to kind of steer the head a little bit and help it avoid half. Lop throws a bucket and then grabs Half's ankles and drags him away as well. So Half is out of the way and safe. But now Althea is kind of holding on to the serpent head,
right,
and in a precarious position until Brashen rushes up.
Yeah, she's now the sole target.
Right, exactly. So as I mentioned, Brashen does run up and attack with a oar. But before that can happen, there is a cry above everything from Paragon. An amazed and furious cry. I know you. I know you. Amber shouted a question, but Althea could not make it out, and she still just gripped to the hook desperately. So Brashen does rush up and kind of distracts it with an oar a little bit here, and the hook comes loose, and now they're just fighting a serpent with a hook and an oar.
Yes. But there, I think, just a quick little aside, there he says, I know you. I guess the poison on the deck reminded him. And I guess we have talked about the serpents that are mindless kind of just spread their poison haphazardly. They don't remember how to specify which poison.
Right.
However, I thought only Malkin had the ability to make people remember with his toxins.
I don't think so. I mean, because this is such uncharted territory, serpents didn't forget before. So this is kind of like, Malkin has the most memories, and therefore he can send those memories to more people, right? And like spark those memories better. It doesn't mean that the others can't send their memories out even unwittingly if they're feral.
I guess. I don't know. I guess because we've never seen the other serpent. It's always the other serpents that aren't Malkin holding down people while Malkin puts his poisons in that serpent's face to remind them who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's specific mention of Malkin's
Yeah,
poisons.
his are more potent for sure. But remember, Paragon is a special boy. He's been sunk before and had serpents talking to him for a long time.
Yeah.
He's been alone without a contact for 30 years. And so, and we've talked about that before, that kind of loses your touchstone of your family, and you can
Right.
dive more into those memories. And he has two dragons struggling for that. So Paragon already knows kind of the secrets of who he was deep down.
Right.
He already had those dreams even before any contact with serpents. And I think just this minimal contact makes him more aware of that and brings those memories forth.
Okay. Yeah.
So Brashen and Althea are squaring off against the serpent here, and Althea swings the hook as the head comes towards them, and kind of levels it like a pike, actually, and she charges. She was aiming for an eye but missed, but instead, the tip of the boat hook struck a color spot on the creature just behind its jaw hinge. To her shock, the tip of the hook plunged into the flesh easily as if she had stabbed a ripe melon. With all her strength, she shoved it as deep as it would go. The hook followed the tip into the animal's flesh. With a jerk, she set it. In agony, the serpent flung its head back. "Get away," she cried needlessly to Brashen. He had already ducked and rolled away. She gave a final jerk on the hook. It tore flesh, and smoking hot poison ran down the serpent's own neck. It shrieked, fountaining poison and blood from the wide open mouth. It shook its head wildly, snatching the gaff from her numbed hands. She sat down hard and stared helplessly up the thrashing creature. Some of its poison landed harmlessly in the sea, but some splattered across Paragon's deck and side. The ship cried out wordlessly, and a tremor ran through his wooden body. As the serpent fell back and sank beneath the waves, Brashen was already shouting for buckets, seawater, and brushes. "Get it off the deck, now!" Brashen's face is scalded scarlet by the serpent's venom, and he's kind of rocking back and forth as if he were trying to rise but could not. Then from the bow came a wild cry that chilled Althea's blood. "I knew you," the paragon bellowed, "and you knew me. By your poisons I know myself." His wild laughter rose on the wind. "Blood is memory." So yeah, that makes me think that like he had a connection. One of the dragons in him had a connection with this former dragon.
Fair enough. That could be. So we take a break from that craziness.
Jump over to the Vestrits
Yeah.
in Bingtown.
And it is a bit of a time jump. It's been several hours from when we last saw Ronica, which it's her point of view now. But the Vestrits have made it home. And last we saw of them, the carriage had been attacked and they had just found Malta. But now we have Ronica in Althea's room trying to get a view of the harbor because it's the only place in the house where you would be able to see it, but the smoke is too thick and there's just nothing to see.
Yeah, so Bingtown was burning, she thinks.
Ronica is in the middle of getting things together for the family to leave with. They are going to flee.
Yep.
It is time to leave. It is clearly too dangerous, and the plan is to take a few things and go to her holding that she has from her bridal pack.
Yep, Ingleby Farm that she brought to the marriage, and that was one thing that she kind of refused to sell early on. That was in Ship of Magic, but that is like a 2 days journey from there, and that's what they're planning on doing at the moment. She kind of discusses how they got back to the house, how Selden wanted to be carried, but they couldn't manage that. They were all kind of supporting each other and found their house barred, knocked on the door, and eventually Rach answered it with like a piece of kindling. And, you know, obviously it was scary for all of them, but they got inside, helped bandage up some of the wounds. Kefria's hand is doing very poorly at this point, and Malta is She was left for dead, basically.
Yeah.
Both eyes blackened and blood dried on her face.
Yes. There is mention that as they were walking home, two separate riders had come by and they had tried to flag the people down, but they were ignored. So something is happening
Right.
and nobody's really caring about these women and young boy trying to get safe.
And during that walk back to their house, once Kefria spoke up and said, I forgot all about them. The satrap and his companion. I mean, did you see them? Ronica shook her head slowly. I wonder what happened to them, she had replied, although in truth she did not. She did not wonder anything about anybody except her own just now. Malta spoke thickly through her puffed mouth. The horsemen took them away. They looked for the other companion, and when they found that I was not she, they just left me there. One of them said I was nearly dead anyway. She fell silent again. And that silence lasted all the way back home, where they eventually met Rach and kind of cleaned up a little bit, as much as they could at least.
Right. And now Selden and Malta are sleeping.
Yep. And Ronica and Rach are gathering provisions and spare clothes and trying to get ready to flee.
Right. Kefria is also awake, but her hand is a lot more hurt than they originally thought. It's swelling really bad, so it's on Ronica to prepare everything.
She doesn't really know what's going on, Ronica doesn't. But armed horsemen had taken the satrap and his companion from the coach last night and left the rest of them to die. The town was burning. The haze was too thick to see what was taking place in the harbor. She would not wait for the chaos to reach her door. And so that's why the plan is to flee.
Right.
Doesn't know what's going on. Let's just be as safe as possible.
Right. And she's thinking first and foremost of her family. She has to protect them. She has to keep them going. And that's really repeated over and over, that she's worried about her family and she's worried about keeping them safe. So
right.
That's what's at the forefront. And then there's a banging at the door. And so she goes to Captain Vestrit's office and finds the marlin spike that he had insisted on keeping hidden in there. It's still there, and she goes to the door.
Who's there? Rain Kupris, please, let me in. Ronica nodded at rage, but did not put down the marlin spike. The serving woman undid the latch and bolt. As the door swung open, Rain recoiled in horror at the sight of the battered old woman. By my honor, I prayed it was not true, he cried. And Malta? Ronica stared at the young rain-wild man. He was still dressed in his elegant evening wear, but the smells of dust and smoke clung to him. He had been in the thick of it. She's alive, Ronica said flatly. Devad Restart is dead, as is the coachman. He did not seem to hear her words. I swear, I did not know. She came in a hired coach. They told me you were all arrived in a hired coach. I expected her to leave that way. Please, is Malta all right? Ronica made the connection. Cold enveloped her. Your men left her to die. In fact, they told her she was dying. That should tell you something of her condition. Good day, Rain Kupris. She motioned to Rach, who began to close the door. Rain flung himself bodily against it. Rach could not hold it against him. He stumbled into the hall, then straightened and faced them. Please, there is so little time. We've driven the galleys from the harbor mouth. I came to get Malta, to get all of you. I can get you out now and up the Rainwild River. You'll be safe up there, but there isn't much time. The Kendry will sail soon, with or without us. The galleys could return and close the harbor at any time. We have to go now. No, Ronica said flatly. I think we'll take care of our own, Rain Kupris. He spun away from her abruptly. Malta, he cried, and sprinted down the hallway toward the wing of bedchambers.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is Rain still wearing a veil right now?
Probably, yeah.
That's just such a weird thought that, like, he's just fully covered, super thick veil. You can't even actually see his face. And he's just like, where's Malta? You'd think you would want to take the veil off, especially with all the smoke and
Maybe it
Everything that he's
protects him a
doing.
little bit.
Fair enough. But yes.
Yeah, so Ronica kind of gets the unlock here that Rain helped orchestrate that whole incident that got them all very injured and threatened her family. So Ronica's not feeling very kindly toward the Rain Wild Man at the
Yeah,
moment.
same, honestly, because not that I was ever feeling kindly towards him, I think. I don't know that I've ever really been like, you know what? No, I was sort of trying to come away with he's not that bad, but I'm back to team hate Rain because what do you mean? Well, she came in a hired coach. I thought that's how she'd leave. That's not how coaches work. Does he not know how coaches work? Does he not know anything? It just is so frustrating that he didn't think that far ahead about somebody that he
Could be how
supposedly cares
most
about.
coaches work, but because the Vestrits are not that wealthy, they couldn't afford to pay the coachman to wait.
I guess. But wouldn't he know that? He knows how dire the straits are.
Not foremost on his mind, I guess.
How much could a banana cost, Michael?
$10. Yeah.
I guess. But it's just like, oh, this whole scene annoys me so much and I hate him. Back to ground zero with him.
Ronica is trying to follow, but she's getting lightheaded, and she describes the young Rain Wilder as having gone mad. He roared Malta's name as he raced down the hall, flinging doors open. He reached Malta's room just as Kefria came flying out of hers at the end of the hall. He looked inside, gave a cry of anguish, and disappeared into her room. "Don't you touch her!" Kefria cried and raced toward the door. But Rain reappeared in the door, Malta wrapped up in a blanket, in his arms. She was as white as the bandages that bound her head. Her eyes were closed and her head lolled against him. "I'm taking her," he said defiantly. "The rest of you should come too, but that's up to you. I can't force you to come with me, but I won't leave Malta here." "You have no right. Is this the new way of your folk to abduct their brides?" Rain gave a sudden wild laugh. "By Sa, she dreamed true. Yes, I take her now. I have the right. By blood or gold the debt is owed. I claim her." He babbled the crazy words. He looked down into her face. "She is mine," he asserted. "You cannot. The payment is not due." "It will be soon, and you cannot possibly amass it. I'm taking her while she is still alive. If I must do it this way, then I shall. Come with me, I beg you. Don't make it be like this for her." He turned to face Kefria. "She will need you. And Selden is not safe here, not if the Chalcedeans overrun the town. Would you see your little son with a slave tattoo on his face?" Kefria's hands flew up to cover her mouth in horror. "Mother?" she asked through her fingers. Ronica decided for all of them. "Get the boy. Go quickly. Take nothing. Just go."
I hate Rain.
Rain is right here. He is right that they should flee with him. That is the
Yes.
safest option. It's weird how he goes about it. He's not in his right mind, but I'm going to say that. This is the correct option for them.
I mean, it is safe, but I don't know. I feel like kidnapping Malta and being like, well, she's my property anyway. I'm invoking the blood oath is like above and beyond weird.
Sure, but he's doing it in his mind to save her life, right?
Right.
He's doing it for noble purposes, and that's just what it is. That's what he has to do to get her out and have her family feel like, okay, he has somewhat of a right to do this.
I guess. I don't know. I just don't like any part of it. I don't feel like
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
neither of us like the pact to begin with,
Right.
that gives them the right to do this.
No, and I'm not trying to insinuate that you're fine with him doing this. I just mean, like, there had to have been another way. He could have said the stuff about Selden being taken as a slave. He could have.
I highlighted that, by the way. Would you see your little son with a slave tattoo on his face? Huh.
She will.
Wintrow. Actually, I don't know if she ever sees him with the slave tattoo because.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't come back.
Well, Vivacia gets rid of the tattoo.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Or Kennit does through Vivacia or whatever, and that's one of his miracles, right? Or something like that. I total aside, but I want to get into his miracles in the later books.
We will. We have time.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know. There's just other ways to do it. And I don't get what you mean. Like, he's gone mad. Like, why? What's his excuse? I guess because he was in the thick of the fighting, question mark. But I don't know. It's not good. It's not a good look.
And remember, we're getting this from perspective of somebody who has no idea what's going on in the city. So
Right.
him kind of barging in and saying like Chalcedeans could overrun the city, we fought them back, is all completely new information. And Rain is coming with the knowledge of like, yeah, we did just fight people. We did just push out soldiers. And he is coming from the side of, this is the worst. Cyrilla told me that they're coming to take over everything and kill everybody.
Right.
To claim Bingtown for their own. So I'm doing this to save everybody's life. So misinformation on both sides, and it just makes Rain look awful.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But I think the heart of what I don't like is how comfortable he is claiming Malta as his, as though she is an object to be claimed.
I don't know if he's comfortable doing it, but he will take any option he can
His
to get her
wild
out.
smiling at at her face as he says, "She's mine," after claiming her. I don't know. I think he's pretty comfortable in that moment.
He's giving a sudden wild laugh, and Ronica's describing him as he's gone mad. So he's obviously frantic and trying to take any avenue he can. I don't think he's like mustache curling evil. She's mine.
I don't know. All I'm saying is he says that while laughing while holding a 13-year-old girl at the ripe age of 23. So I don't know.
He's like 20 or 21 and
okay.
Still not better, but
much better. Sorry. Yeah. No, but anyway, whatever. It's bad. It doesn't look good. The optics aren't great, but they never were. So carry on, I guess.
Ronica makes the decision. The family is going to go. But she is standing on the porch and watching them right away. And she kind of recounts the goodbye scene. Kefri is trying to convince her to come along with them. And Ronica is like, I'm staying. I have to stay. I can't leave you like this. You must. It is your duty to your family. Now go. Go. Rain, take them away from here before their only chance is gone. Only to herself did she add, if Bingtown is going to end in blood and smoke, I will see it. And I must see to burying Davad. Rach stood at her side on the porch. They watched until they were out of sight. Then Ronica sighed heavily. Everything was suddenly so simple. Rain would get them out of the harbor and to safety. There was only herself to worry about now, and she had stopped caring about what became of her a long time ago. She felt a faded smile come to her scratched face. She turned to the former slave at her side and took her hand. Well, a quiet moment at last. Shall we have a cup of tea? She asked her friend. And I highlighted the she asked her friend part because I thought that was a great comparison to where we discussed Ronica to begin with in Ship of Magic. Basically, she only referred to Rach as a slave or a former slave or, Davad's, servant that he had.
Servant, wink, wink.
But this is kind of, even though it's chaos, it's kind of a moment of peace for Ronica because the responsibility is taken out of her hands here. She knows as far as she is able, and this is the best decision that she could make, that her family is safe.
Yeah.
She could not have done better in this situation. So she's like, whew.
It's over.
I can chill. I don't care about me.
Yeah. And to be fair to Ronica, this was the first time in a really long time where she's not had to be responsible for everybody.
Yeah.
Maybe in her whole life.
Right.
But yeah, you definitely see that relief. I mean, I think that's the whole reason why she pushed Ephraim to make Kyle the beneficiary and the owner of the Vivacia. Well, maybe. I guess not technically Kyle, but whatever. Because she wanted to not have to take care of things anymore. She wanted to be able to hand things over to other people. And now she finally gets away from all that responsibility and the stress, and she can have a moment of peace and quiet with her friend Rach. But I do also want to ask, was Rach given the option to go to the Rain Wilds, or?
I would guess, yeah. But Rach has her own reasons, and they don't really touch on Rach much.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's just a thought that I had, like, wow, poor Rach, she doesn't really get an option. She just got to stay and watch the world burn.
We jump back over to Althea's point of view, and this is a few hours after. It is the afternoon, although to Althea it feels like midnight because she's trying to sleep. But Clef is saying, hey, the captain wants to see you.
Right. When Althea gets down from the bunk, she realizes that Jack must be on watch, and Amber probably never came back from comforting Paragon, so she is alone in the bunk.
Althea says that she has given up on Paragon, at least for now. After the incident with the serpent, the ship had ranted for a time, phrases that taunted Althea because they almost made sense. Blood is memory. You can spill it, you can devour it, but you can never erase what it holds. Blood is memory. He had repeated it until she thought she would go crazy, not with the recitation, but with her failure to grasp the meaning. It was at the edge of her understanding.
First of all, what is there to grasp? There's memory and blood. Why would that be such a hard concept for a Liveship Trader's daughter to not understand? Second of all, what do you mean it's just out of grasp and it's really bothering you? Is that because of her time fully delving into the memories of Vivacia?
Could be, yeah.
I don't know. Just a weird, feels odd that she's so invested in what Paragon is saying and is trying to work it out, but also has no idea what it means. And maybe that's just because we know what it means. And so then I forget that it would be confusing if you didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle.
Right.
But also, it feels like you should know, considering you own a live ship and know that people have to die on the live ship to be absorbed into the ship.
Yeah, but even traders who have been captains for years don't think about those things.
I guess. I don't know.
Just tradition, I think, for them at this point.
Fair enough.
Althea still thinks a little bit more as she's getting dressed and ready to go that, Paragon had subsided to muttering and then eventually just fallen silent with almost a smile on his mouth. But Amber had been frantic with worry. When Althea had left her, the beadmaker had been sitting out on the bowsprit playing her pipes. Nursery tunes, she called them, but they were no songs Althea had ever known. Again, another example that she knows an instrument. I think that's what was pointed out before to us in one of the emails.
Yeah.
She notes that the deck had taken a lot of damage from the serpent poison and is very surprised at how much damage was done so quickly to the very, very hard wood that is wizard wood. And then she'd gone to her cabin and fallen asleep. And now she has been woken up. Brashen probably wanted to tell her how she should have handled it. Well, that was the captain's prerogative. She just hoped he talked fast or she'd fall asleep in his face. She belted up her trousers and went to face her doom. Very negative Nancy about the whole thing, but does knock on the door. She's told to enter, and she enters into the captain's chamber where she immediately cries out, "Oh, Brashen!" His dark eyes were shocking in his scarlet face. Huge, watery blisters stood up on his cheeks and brow like a rain wilder's warts. The tattered remains of his shirt he had been wearing hung across the back of a chair. He wore his fresh shirt loosely, as if he could scarcely bear the touch of it against his skin. He showed his teeth in a grimace meant to be a smile. "You look no better," he offered her. He made a small gesture at the wash basin in his room. "I've left you some warm water in the pitcher." "Thank you." Turns her back, starts washing and dipping her hands in there, hisses because it stings and then it feels really good. So she's kind of washing out all the poison a little bit on her hands. Brashen kind of continues on, saying that half is going to be all right. He got the worst of it, but I had the cook wash him down with fresh water, and he seems like he's going to be okay.
That handsome face will bear some scars, I suspect.
And then he pauses and points out, "He disobeyed your order as well as mine." "I doubt that he remembers that right now," Althea says. "Perhaps not now, but as soon as he's out of bed, I'll see that he does. If he'd left the damn serpent alone, it might have gone away. His actions endangered the whole ship and crew. He seems to think he knows better than mate or captain what to do. He discounts your experience and mine. He wants a bit of stepping on. But he is a good hand, Althea pointed out reluctantly. Brashen did not falter. When I'm finished stepping on him, he'll be a better hand, one that obeys. She supposed there was a small rebuke for herself in there, in that she hadn't taught half that lesson herself. She bit her tongue and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face looked scalded. She ran her fingers lightly over it. It was pebbled stiff with tiny blisters. Like the serpent's scales, she thought, and snagged for a moment in the memory of its beauty. So they briefly discuss half. Brashen's like, I gotta punish him. It's gotta come for me now because he disobeyed me too.
Yeah. Yeah, so he'll learn a lesson. Although I do think that Althea being able to take down the serpent when half couldn't is kind of the moment that Amber was talking about. Where,
We'll see if that is true.
yeah. At least that's how I felt when I first read it, of like, oh, there's the moment. There she did it.
Right. Brashen continues on saying, I'm taking R2 off your watch and putting him on Lavoie's. Althea is very, very angry for a second and says, I don't think that's fair, sir. Because she thinks that he's stepping in and being like, you can't control your men, so I'm going to move him.
Right.
But Brashen continues saying, neither do I. But he begged Lavoie on his knees, and the man finally gave in to be rid of him. Lavoie promised him every dirty duty he could find on the ship, and R2 wept tears of gratitude. What on earth did you do to him? The captain should never be too interested in that sort of thing. She's speaking through clenched teeth as she's washing her face a little bit more.
Right.
And washing the bite marks that R2 had given her. Brashen gave a soft snort of laughter. That's funny. Clef came running to get me, and I came, my heart in my throat. Clef said Paragon was shouting that you were being killed. Then I got there, and here you were, hauling R2 along on a freight hook. I looked at that, and I thought to myself, saw's breath, what would Captain Vestrit say to me if he could see her now? She could see the back of his head in the mirror. She scowled at it. Would he ever understand that she could take care of herself? He went on in a softer voice. All that came to mind was Ephraim Vestrit's voice saying, if the mate is handling it, the captain shouldn't see it. He was right. He never interfered with me when I was settling small matters aboard the Vivacia. Even Lavoie knew that. I shouldn't have said a word. It was almost an apology. Lavoie's not so bad, Althea offered in return. So this is the apology I was talking about before. Brashen kind of admitting, like, hey, you had it handled. I shouldn't have tried to interfere.
Yeah. And I think this is a big deal because it's Brashen admitting that Althea can handle herself, which is one of their big, I don't know if disagreements is the right word, but maybe misunderstandings.
Yeah. Because that's all Althea thinks about, right?
Yes.
Is that no one thinks I'm good enough.
Exactly.
And Brashen's just like, I like her a lot and I don't want her to get hurt.
Yeah.
And that really gets on Althea's nerves.
Yeah, because Althea thinks of it as coming from a place of he doesn't think she can take care of herself. And I don't think that's the case. Maybe a little bit, but I think...
I feel like it's more like Brashen feels she's outclassed because she's a woman compared to a lot bigger and more dangerous men.
Yeah. And I think he doesn't see her as somebody who's willing to go all the way because he sees himself that way. And that's not how a pristine old trader's daughter would act.
Right.
And
yeah.
I don't know. He's like,
I've gotten myself dirty and I was a pirate. And
yeah. And so I think he forgets that humans are more complex than that. And I don't know. So I don't think it's coming from a place of like, he doesn't think she can. It's more of a, he wants to protect her.
But that does go a long way with Althea.
Yes, it does. His acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm. But Brashen does agree with her. Like, yeah, Lavoie is coming around and I'll leave you if you'd like to make fuller use of the water. And Althea's like, no, it's fine. Sleep is what I most need. And there's a little silence there as she says, I don't smell that bad, do I? She'd overstepped the bounds, she thinks. You never did, he admitted quietly. I was just angry and hurt. I had thought there was something between us, something that we're better as we are now, Althea broke in quickly. Undoubtedly, he said dryly. The silence stretched out. She looked at her battered hands. Every knuckle was swollen. When she flexed the fingers on her right hand, it felt like there was sand in the joints. Still, they moved. More to break the silence than to ask, she queried, If you can move your fingers, that means nothing is broken, right? Means nothing is badly broken, Brashen corrected her. Let me see. Knowing it was a mistake, she still turned and held out her hands to him. So he comes over and takes her hands and moves her fingers and felt the bones and shakes his head over her knuckles and looks at the bite marks. He released one of her hands and lifts her chin and looks at her face critically. You're going to be all right, he told her. He cocked his head and nodded to himself. You're a tough woman. You probably saved my life when you were distracted that thing with the oar, she suddenly remembered. Yes, I'm a dangerous man with an oar. He still held her hand. Without warning, he drew her closer. When he leaned down to kiss her, she did not step away. She lifted her face to his. His mouth was gentle on hers. She closed her eyes to it and refused to be wise. She refused to think at all. He broke the kiss. He drew her closer but did not embrace her. For just an instant, he rested his chin on top of her head. His voice was deep. You're right. I know you're right. We're better as we are. He sighed heavily. That doesn't make it any easier for me. He released her hand. She could not think of anything to say to that. It was not easy for her either, but to tell him that would only make it harder for both of them. He'd said she was a tough woman. She proved it by walking to the door. Thank you, she said softly at the door. He made no reply and she went out. She passes Clef on the way out. He was kicking one bare heel against the wall and chewing his lower lip. She frowned at his idleness. Peeking at keyholes isn't right, she told him severely as she passed. Neither is kissing the captain, he replied insolently. With a grin and a flash of dirty souls, he was gone. Neither is kissing their captain.
I love Clef. He's my favorite. The only unproblematic one in the bunch.
Right.
Ugh.
Yeah, so pretty eventful chapter here. Results in a little bit of a happy ending, although sad, I guess bittersweet. I guess they're both like, yeah, it's not going to work out. We both like each other, but we can't. It's forbidden love and we're better as we are.
Will they, won't they? They're back on the will they train.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, Paragon is kind of left in a state of what's going to happen to him. Is he finally turned mad? We know as readers, even if you're a first-time reader, what the live ships were, and him screaming out, I knew you, is kind of scary for a first-time reader, especially with hints of like him being mad the whole time. So it kind of builds a lot of tension, especially with the next chapter jumping over to Vivacia. We don't really get him next, so. Yeah, interesting chapter for sure. And then, of course, Wintrow's whole, I'm committed fully now.
Yeah, well, it was bound to happen. Right. We already knew. We read ahead. We read the series. But no, it is really interesting to have these points of view. It's at this point in the book, everything's sort of that, like there's a lot happening in all the chapters, but this is kind of a lull in things happening. There's more explanation, but yet it still was a driving chapter. There's still a lot to think about. I don't know. I feel like the slow burn romance happening between Althea and Brashen is cute. It almost makes me feel like it's not quite the right book for it, if that makes sense. Like, I think it makes sense to the characters, but I think their love story almost feels like it should just be in a romance book and not in this series.
Why?
I don't know.
Fantasy books can't include romance?
No, they absolutely should, and they can. But I don't know, something about it just feels like I wish there I just wish that I could just read a romance book.
You just want it
Yeah.
focused on them the whole
Yeah,
time.
I just like romance books and I love the slow burn
Yeah.
enemies to lovers trope. It's my favorite. So
Well, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any recommendations for enemies to lovers romance books for Emma to read, please
Yeah.
email us at isfitshappy@gmail.com.
Please.
Or you can message us on any of our social medias or comment on any of our posts on social media. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Threads, on YouTube, or it is Fitshappy on all of those. Thank you so much for tuning in.
See you next week. Okay, now we get to do my favorite part, which is go over what you guys have sent in. So we are going to start today off with some Facebook messages that we got. And this is on episode 192 about getting ready for the ball. This was the calm.
Yeah.
And there were quite a few comments about the mark on the bluish gray mark on the back of Malta's neck.
Yeah, I think the consensus was that that is one of the fingerprints.
Yes, I think Hedwig and Dana and
I think we got a couple emails as well.
yes.
Anna agrees with that.
Yes. And Anna sent in the excerpt from next book where there's a little bit more detail and
not next book. It's from the last trilogy, actually,
yes.
when they meet Malta in Kelsingra.
Yes. So we have more textual proof that it is actually a fingerprint and not a scale.
Yeah. I'll read the passage here. I have one little gotcha thing.
Oh,
I still believe. I think
Luke
it's a
loves a gotcha.
I think it's a fingerprint, but there is one thing that is a little bit odd about it. So, Amber. So this is Beloved and Fitz. They go to Kelsingra, and Rapskill thinks that they are thieves because the Beloved does re-silver their fingers.
Yes.
But they are getting called out before the whole group of everything in Rapskill see they're a thief. They stole the silver from the dragons, etc., etc. And Lady Amber emerges and starts telling the story about how, when I saw you, Queen Malta, we were on the deck of Paragon and you were going to save your family's ship and all that sort of stuff. And then Malta kind of steps up into that and recalls the whole scene with Amber. And Amber says, I caught you, and I touched you on the back of your neck with my skilled fingers. Silvered, you would say. And by that magic, I called you back to your own body. But it left a mark on you, and a tiny tendril of the link that we share to this very day. What? Malta was incredulous. It's true, the words burst from King Rain, along with a laugh born of both relief and joy. On the back of your neck, my dear. I saw it there in the days when your hair was as black as the crow's wing, before Tintaglia turned it to gold. 3 grayish ovals, like silver fingerprints gone dusty with age. 3, huh? Interesting.
Well,
there's only 1 mark on the back of her neck.
Yeah.
That's my little gotcha.
Okay. Well, I will argue, though, that in that book, Malta is the sister of, and in every other book after this trilogy, Malta is the sister of Althea and not the
Kefria
the
doesn't
niece.
exist.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's probably just one of those things that got missed in editing.
Right. Yeah, but that's my little it's probably a fingerprint, but why weren't more spots described then? Oh well. But yeah, a lot of people chimed in and said that it was probably the silver fingerprints and not the start of a scale or another growth from the Rain Wild. And that, things on a human skin can look different than what they're described as the color wise,
Right.
It could just turn into like a bluish gray if it was silver to begin with.
Right. Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for letting us know what you thought. We then got a comment from Dana about the contrast between Malta and Cyrilla in the chapter, the 192, The Calm, where we have Malta starting the chapter off with talking about how she's tired of dealing with the money and the figures and all of that. She just wants to be a woman that doesn't have to worry about it. And then we go to Cyrilla's point of view where she views a woman being able to do all those things as power and something that she's looking forward to.
Right. Yeah. Dana says it sort of makes sense why she idolizes the Bingtown culture if she sees it as desirable. It really drives home that character bias that Hobb hides within her writing so expertly. And that's true. She is very, very good at, from a point of view, getting into that character and writing with their biases in mind and really writing how they would perceive situations. So
Yeah.
just a little shout out to Hobb there.
Yeah. And I think it was a really good point how differently it is seen between the two women and how we have the reality of day in, day out being in charge of stuff like that with Malta being like, ooh, actually, this is annoying, which maybe Malta would like it more if their finances were in such dire straits. Maybe it would be a little
True.
bit more enjoyable. But with Cyrilla, who's never actually had to experience what it means to really run the finances in the household in that way, it's more of a pipe dream and a wow, look at all this like power I could have.
Right.
So yeah, very good point. Thank you, Dana.
Then we had a comment also about Malta on the follow up chapter, The Storm, from Degenhart. And Degenhart is talking about the situation with the satrap, how Malta and the satrap are, dancing, and the satrap propositions her. And we discussed how Malta is kind of shocked at it and then kind of understands a little bit later of what's going on, what he's hinting at. And Degenhart just kind of is saying, coming a little bit in defense of Malta. I don't think we were like ragging on her in any
No.
way. And I don't think Degenhart is hinting at that, but just,
To be fair, Rain was.
yeah, just stating his side of this whole thing, that saying that Malta was shocked, yes, and rightly so. The most powerful man of her universe just offered her what she's been wanting for a very long time, but only after a moment she realizes that he just wants to get under her stitched together skirts. So it just kind of coming to defense, like, yeah, she is a tiny child. Yeah, there's a moment of shock and she won't put it together immediately, but that's kind of natural. And then just kind of everything sinking in and realizing what he's actually hinting at is kind of, it hits you in the face.
Yeah. Degenhart also makes a comment that he believes that Malta would be able to suss out that it is just a ploy to get into her skirts and not a real truth that he's willing to help. I'm not as convinced.
I don't agree with that because I think she's thinking about going along with the plan.
Yeah, she is too invested in potentially going along with this plan and deciding that she'll just make that decision on her own.
Because it affects her only.
Yeah. For me to believe that she would be able to, in the moment, realize, oh, hey, he's lying. This is not happening. But maybe, I don't know. She, to be fair, the only time she actually gets to think about it, there's a lot of things happening and she's not really given any time to breathe and actually think through everything. And maybe she would come to her own decision of it's not worth it. I don't know.
Yeah. There's a lot of discussion we could have about Malta, about her belief in the power that men hold because of how she grew up and her faith in her father, and how she's been let down, and she's said that she's been let down by the power of men. But here is the most powerful man, and this is her last chance to, in her mind, probably, this is her last chance to say that, yeah, my father does have power. Here is a man who can prove me right that men have power and are powerful and are strong. The satrap can save everything, and that proves that my father could also do powerful things because men
Yeah.
equivalence, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of like a desperate belief that, yes, my worldview is correct.
Right.
Someone has to help and save.
I find it similar to what happened this chapter with Wintrow, where we were talking about how his core belief that Saw is in charge of everything, like he can't let go of that. So he
Right.
has to believe other things that don't make as much sense to continue to be able to believe his core belief.
Yeah.
And so I see it similar to that. Maybe not as strongly held and not as earth shattering for Malta,
Right.
but I think a similar vein of it makes sense to her worldview. And so it's easy to believe.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So thank you, Degenhart, for bringing that up. We then also got an email from Jonas about episode 192, which was on the storm. So the previous.
Yeah. Just of Kefria trying to distract Malta when Malta's trying to share her inner woes.
Yes. And it was when we were talking about it, and I brought up that I think it's a bad tactic. I don't think that's exactly the wording I used, but that is the thought that I had. I didn't
It's avoidance, right? It's
Yeah.
not a mother trying to comfort
I
or
don't
like
think
get her daughter through a troubling time. It's
Right.
just let's move on from it.
Yeah, and I acknowledge that I am not a parent. I don't really have anything to stand on with like making claims about people being bad parents or like making a bad parenting choice. I think I more so was annoyed at Kefria having a chance to bond further with her daughter and to connect. And I think Malta giving Kefria this chance for bonding and Kefria not bonding. I think
Yeah.
Kefria's just really been disappointing me lately. And so it was more coming from a place of like, you had this chance to connect with your kid and instead you took the easy route out.
Yeah. And Jonas kind of agrees that Kefria missed an opportunity here and it was not the best tactic in that moment. However, does say that, you know, that tactic can be useful in other situations, but just that one in the book, not the right moment to do that.
Right. Yeah.
Distraction was not what Malta needed right there.
Yeah. And I do want to say that I also acknowledge that distraction is useful. I do admit that that is a good tactic sometimes. It just, yeah, more about this moment than the general idea of it. But thank you for bringing that up, Jonas. It's good to have that point of view.
We had another email from Anna, other than the one that she sent in from talking about the textual evidence of Malta's fingerprints, about how she's really glad for Robin Hobb to be writing these scenes, and especially these scenes coming from a female perspective and a female author in general, because it highlights a lot of things that are from a female lived life.
Yeah. Yeah. So, especially talking about Althea and Althea's struggles with Half being a sexist jerk and Brashen not being able to actually support her because
It's hidden, right?
Yes, it's like just a hidden thing. And I mean he could support her, but just she doesn't feel she can go to him for help because of the roles that they are in and how there's that whole authority thing of men don't like being punished by women and
And then the whole part about Malta being disillusioned with her role in society growing up and what she wants to do versus what she is able to do. And she finds out, you know, it's not what she thought. So it's just the whole how restrictive the role of women can be in society. And Anna's very appreciative that Hobb is writing from probably a place of experience.
Right. And
because it's done subtly and well.
Yeah.
You know?
And especially Anna just realized it this read through as well, or like noticed it more, especially with Malta's whole thing about wanting to catch men. And once she becomes disillusioned and realized that she can't have their power if she catches them, she doesn't really care about catching them anymore. It's not as fun because there's no power. There's nothing for her to gain from it. And that's really well done. And I will agree, I think personally, I really like reading a series that's written by a woman. Surprise. Um,
I
but
had a tough time getting you to read these books to begin with because Fitz was a male.
yeah. So I just, in growing up reading, I had a really hard time reading books that were written by male authors, especially if there was a male protagonist, which was a lot of fantasy books. I just couldn't get into it. I couldn't relate. It was something about the way, like, men's lived experiences that is so far from what I have lived that I just couldn't get in the shoes of. And so when Luke was introducing me to this series and was like, oh, it's about this guy who is an assassin, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to stop you right there. I don't want to read it. I'm actually not going to, I'm good. And then he pushed me to, and it was a female author. So I was like, all right, I'll give it one chapter. And I was
Right.
hooked, and it was
Yeah.
great. And I have since been more willing to open up my reading and read a few more perspectives. But I think there's just something, especially I think for people who identify as women, to have that written in and to have those little tiny like lived experiences that you can catch on to and be like, yes, that is what life is like. That is something
Right.
I have experienced too. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm really glad that having Robin Hobb write about these experiences grants weight to them and a realism that maybe isn't portrayed very often in literature or
Yeah.
fantasy, especially.
Yeah.
So,
I think especially for the time when Robin Hobb was publishing these originally.
2000.
Well, in the 90s, wasn't it? The late 90s for the first
The first
trilogy?
trilogy,
Yeah.
yes. These ones were like 2000 to 2004 or 5, 6,
Okay.
something like that.
But I think, yeah, like
2004 maybe. I don't remember.
I think having a fantasy series with a female author that doesn't have to be centered around a female or a love story is really nice and refreshing. And
Oh, this was 98. You're right.
yeah, I
Madship
thought so.
came out in 98.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that was good. I mean, I don't know. I was like 2 in 98, so I wasn't really reading a ton of fantasy at the time. So maybe some of our older listeners can write it and let us know if this is a breath of fresh air or not. But I don't know. I just really appreciate that you get that perspective, and it was really nice of Anna to write in to talk about that as well, because
Mhm.
it is nice. I think, yeah, it's nice to have that perspective.
Finally, our last email is from Hedwig, and it's a little bit more of a dense topic. It's discussing serpents, dragons, cognition, and identity. So, Hedwig is talking kind of about the structure of language itself and how language affects people, and specifically brings up the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis or linguistic relativity hypothesis, basically meaning that the way people's language is structured, different cultures' languages are structured, changes how those people view the world and how they structure their world around them. So, like, different languages or different cultures of people can describe colors in different ways, and therefore they have, a different view of what that color is. It's just a very simple term of it.
Right.
But Hedwig is kind of applying that to dragons and serpents. And it's kind of interesting here because a lot of it kind of boils down to how dragons and serpents are so malleable with how they view things because their identity is not focused in their one brain, their one body like humans are. Because they change and retain their memories throughout, it's much more than just their physical form because they can morph into live ships. And yes, they rail against that imprisonment, but their cocoon becomes their body, which then they can take consciousness and be alive in there. They can become serpents and have all those memories. And then ultimately they can become dragons and fly too. And throughout the whole thing, they have the same language or they can speak the same language.
Right. Yeah, I found this whole email very interesting and intriguing of an idea where language itself is part of what creates dragons. So
Yeah.
there's also the
And the
idea.
intentions behind that language.
Exactly, yeah. And so dragons have a wider array of language because they're less confined
Yeah.
by a physical form because they have so much liquidity to them, so much malleability.
Hmm.
And so they're less refined.
Yeah, less, I don't know, less solid, and
Yeah.
they're more easily altered, which there's a couple examples in here that Hedwig brings up. And one is the relationships that they have with humans, right? Just the original Elderlings, they're dragons at one point, I think it's hinted at in here, were just feral animals. And
Yeah.
eventually they kind of developed into the more regal creatures that we see. Yes, still selfish and kind of described like cats, but
Yeah.
uh, at least they can communicate and they can have feelings and attachments. And humans helped develop that. And that also shows why, if they have too much contact with humans, abominations slash others can be born from them and their progeny because they are so altered by other people's thoughts and their way of thinking. And then Hedwig also brings up the wit bond with Fitz and Night Eyes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, definitely. There's that bond where they change each other. And
Yeah.
we see that with all wit partners, how
Hmm.
there is some sort of inexplicable change that happens, but especially with Night Eyes, where words like tomorrow and yesterday are really hard concepts for him to grasp. And he eventually does kind of understand them, but says that they're useless, so doesn't use them.
Yeah, we see Night Eyes morph from someone who only sends images, who still sends images later on, but Fitz interprets them as full sentences
Yeah,
with like punctuation and everything rather than just random thoughts.
exactly.
So they have definitely altered each other and kind of influenced each other through their language and how they communicate with one another.
Right.
And going back to the dragons, which I think this is an important part for the Rainwilds in particular, is that in the Rainwild Chronicles, Hedwig brings up that the dragons are basically feral animals who don't do anything and are just hungry when they're born, right? In the Rainwild Chronicles.
Yeah. So,
But with the keepers,
but they are, so first they are treated that way. They're treated
yeah,
as these base animals that don't do anything. They're malformed. And so nothing better than a regular beast. And that's all they are. But yeah, like you said, with the keepers, they turn into full-fledged dragons that can fly because they believe they can fly.
yeah,
The praise and the
mhm,
talking to and of the keepers is what helps them grow and helps them
forms their
become.
worldview. Yeah.
Yeah. And I found that idea really, really interesting that they are so malleable to the world around them, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Very interesting
yeah.
topic. I'm not intelligent enough or knowledgeable enough on this subject to really deep dive into it, but it's very interesting to just kind of scratch the surface.
Yeah, no, I really like it. It made me think of there's a mythical creature, and I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but there's a mythical creature that it's a belief that it will only exist if people give it power by believing it
Mm,
exists. And there's like probably a lot of belief systems out there like that, but that's kind of what this is making me think of, where
yeah.
dragons are only able to rule over the sky and be these majestic, amazing creatures because humans have given them that power through believing in them. And I don't know, I really liked that. So yeah. So thanks, Hedwig, for giving us a lot to think about. I also don't feel quite knowledgeable enough. I'm definitely not as smart enough to really deep dive on this topic specifically. So, but it is still interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody who writes in. We love hearing from you guys, and we can't wait to hear what you have to say next week.